Everyone knows that dreams are strange, but people often say they have deeper meanings. The details of your dreams vanish in an instant, leaving only faint impressions behind. I have to admit, I've tried to remember my dreams, especially back when I was in therapy after a bad car accident. My therapist suggested I log the details of my dreams to help with the healing process. I'm doing well now, but I remember searching online for websites that could help me remember my dreams more clearly. Like those who seek to experience lucid dreaming. That's when I came across a website I often visited called Dreamstorm.com. It started when a friend messaged me asking how I was doing. I replied and asked if he knew of any websites that could help me with dream recall. About 12 minutes later, just as I was heading to the fridge for a snack, he finally responded. Dreamstorm.com, he wrote, mentioning he'd seen it discussed on a subreddit. He said it was weird, but might be useful for my problem. I clicked on the link he sent, and it opened a forum website. The site featured several videos linked to YouTube, mostly about healthy sleep habits. The design was reminiscent of Reddit or 4chan, yet it felt oddly comforting. The background was gray, and the website's logo was a brain with a pentacle in the center. The symbol surprised me. I thought my friend might have sent me to some weird occult site, but I decided to check it out. Each thread had a different topic related to dreams, but some were a bit off. The first thread I clicked on was about illustrations people had made based on what they vaguely remembered from their dreams. As I scrolled through, I saw a series of drawings that made me feel increasingly uncomfortable. I'll try to describe the illustrations as best I can. Blind Pig Jim. The illustration was drawn in a sketchbook. It depicted a tall, lanky, shirtless old man wearing a mask that resembled a pig's face. The background featured a series of houses in a surreal landscape, with the sun displaying a disturbingly realistic face. The artist commented, "I had a dream where I was being watched by this guy in a pig mask. The sun was always singing a strange song about flowers. Every time I walked into a house, it was empty, except for a jar of human eyeballs in the center." Window Watchers. This artwork was unsettling, to say the least. It showed a small sketch of a bedroom from the perspective of somebody sitting on a bed. The room contained various objects: a dresser with knobs replaced by staring eyes, a tall lamp in the corner. At first, nothing seemed unusual until I noticed, thanks to the comments, a man standing behind the window, staring with huge dilated eyes and a sick, perverted smile. The artist didn't provide a proper comment, just a poem. Window watcher, passing through, watching you sleep, is all he do. He picks a friend, I wonder who. Close your blinds, shame on you. You're gonna make him feel so blue. Oh, so sad, boo-hoo-hoo. God is here. This was more of a doodle. It depicted a man standing in front of 3 obelisks that seemed to stare at him. Above them was a singular being, distorted by scribbles, with clouds of smoke presented similarly about him. There was no comment, and I assumed the title served as the description. A lot of these illustrations were disturbing, but those 3 stuck with me the most. As I scrolled through the threads, I noticed several people describing similar dreams, which only added to my discomfort. Feeling unsettled, I closed the website and shut down my computer. It was already around 2 or 3 a.m., and I realized I'd been exploring the site for quite some time. I climbed into bed, hoping for some rest, but as soon as I drifted off, I found myself back in my chair. I walked towards my bedroom door, but when I opened it, my house had transformed into a cold concrete staircase. I ascended the steps, feeling a growing sense of dread, until I reached a red metal door. I grasped the handle and tried to open it. Then suddenly, I woke up. I couldn't move for a while after waking up, struggling to process what might have been behind that door in my dream. Eventually, I got out of bed, turned on my computer, and went back to the website. As soon as it loaded, I found one of the threads and posted about my dream. After a few minutes, somebody replied, saying they had experienced something similar. However, instead of the red metal door being at the top of a staircase, it was in their house. Several more people began commenting on my post, sharing their own stories about the red metal door. I kept scrolling through the forums, delving deeper and deeper into every thread, trying to understand what my dreams could mean. It wasn't just about other dreams. What did mine say about me? I continued until I encountered a thread titled Sigmund AVI. I clicked on it and saw that most of the posts were about nightmares, many with accompanying videos. There were too many to describe in full, but here are the ones that stood out. Melody AVI. The video was set at night in a playground. A faint, melancholy groaning could be heard, as if someone or something was singing in pain. The camera panned across the playground, then focused on a colorful structure. There, a creature with a mutilated face stared directly at the camera. It looked like a man whose neck had been twisted and mangled, with no eyelids. The video ended abruptly with the creature's face filling the screen, sending chills down my spine as I stared at it. Wishwatch, MP4. The video began with static, then cut to a clip of a person sleeping in bed. The cameraman silently watched the person for about 12 minutes. As the person began to stir and wake up, the cameraman suddenly fled and the video cut off. The comment section was flooded with links to the window watcher drawing, repeating over and over. Some commenters dismissed the video as a reenactment of the artwork, but something about it felt disturbingly real to me. Sadwalker AVI. The video wouldn't play. I tried multiple times, but it remained stuck on the first frame. A disfigured man in a trench coat and a fedora, standing on a dark street. The comments explained that the video was broken, likely taken down by the original poster, but the corrupted file somehow remained online. One commenter who had seen the video before it was removed described it as showing the disfigured man walking down the street and eventually killing a dog in a blind fit of rage. I was relieved I didn't have to see the gore described by that commenter. I wouldn't want to witness such a thing. Several of these videos were somewhat related to dreams, but most were simply disturbing. I continued exploring the threads of the forum, skipping the videos and reading several posts about dreams, some more unsettling than others. Eventually, I decided to leave the forum and return to the softer, more popular section of the websites that weren't as horrifying as Sigmund AVI. I was about to go back to the illustration thread when I noticed something off about the website's logo. It usually featured a pentacle inside of a brain, but now it displayed a Greek letter instead. I clicked on it, and a black background appeared on my screen, with the same red metal door from my dream. I moved my mouse towards it and clicked it. The page took me back to the website, but now it's different. The forums were all gone, replaced by a single message, undergoing repairs. I decided to close the window and turn off my computer. It was about 5 p.m. I went about my day, but a few hours later, I returned to my computer and found that the website was gone. Everything had been deleted, and I searched for any information about what had happened to Dreamstorm.com. I checked other websites, trying to find anything about it, but several people commented that it had never existed. I even asked my friend about it, but he claimed not to know what I was talking about. I showed him our message as proof that he had sent me the website, but he just gave me a confused look. The link he had sent wasn't to Dreamstorm.com, but to a Wikipedia article about dreams. If anyone has any information about Dreamstorm.com, please let me know as soon as possible. I worked the night shift as a security guard at a downtown office building. It's an old structure, built in the 70s. While it's nothing special, the building has its fair share of quirks. Flickering lights, creaking pipes, and an elevator that makes the most unsettling groaning sounds whenever it moves. Usually the shift is quiet. Just me, the cameras, and the dim hum of the overhead lights. But a few nights ago, something changed. Around 2 a.m., I noticed someone on the cameras. A figure, he or it, I suppose, was standing in the lobby, just out of reach of the light. I couldn't make out his face, but his clothes looked old, like they didn't belong in this decade. He stood there for a moment, motionless, before moving towards the elevator. His gait was stiff, almost unnatural. He pressed the button and waited, but the elevator didn't move. I kept watching, thinking maybe it was a homeless guy who'd wandered in, but after a few minutes, something strange happened. The lights flickered once, then just went out completely. The screen showed the lobby cameras turning black. My heart raced. I waited for the power to come back on, but it didn't. It was just silence. I decided to go check it out in person. Stupid, I know, but curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing my flashlight, I made my way down to the lobby. As I walked, I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness as it pressed in on me. Everything felt wrong. When I reached the lobby, it was pitch black, except for the weak beam of my flashlight. I swept the light across the room. It was empty. No sign of the man. But the air felt thick, like something was there, hiding just out of sight. The only sound was the soft hum of the elevator. I pointed the light at the elevator doors. They were open. The elevator has never moved, not in all the time that I've been here. Yet now it was wide open, revealing an abyss of darkness inside. I stepped forward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The darkness inside the elevator seemed to pulse, like it was alive, waiting for something. waiting for someone. My gut screamed at me to turn around, to run back to the security room, but I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Then I felt it. Something brushed against the back of my neck. It was light, almost like the softest whisper of a hand, but it was enough to send every nerve in my body into overdrive. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just empty air. Or so I thought. The flashlight flickered and I caught a glimpse, just a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something tall, too tall, was standing just behind me. I turned, heart pounding in my chest, but when I looked, the thing was gone. The lobby was empty. Except, I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel something watching from behind me, but every time I turned, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the suffocating weight of its presence. It was like the air was alive, pressing against me, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. The lights flickered again, and suddenly I was plunged into complete darkness. I heard the elevator doors creak as if they were slowly beginning to close. I took a step back, and that's when I felt it again. This time the touch wasn't soft. It was cold, firm, like a hand wrapping around my shoulder. I whipped around, expecting to see him, the man, the figure from the camera, but instead there was nothing. Only the endless black. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. My back pressed against the elevator doors as they started to close behind me. That's when I realized I was no longer just imagining the touch. The hand was still there, cold fingers digging into my skin. The whispering was louder now, right in my ear. A single, rasping breath that sent ice shooting through my spine. Before I could move, I felt something shift behind me, and the world tilted. The elevator moved. The doors, though closed, didn't feel like doors anymore. It felt like I was being pulled backwards into something. I stumbled forward, trying to escape whatever was behind me, but it was too late. I don't know how to explain what happened next. The walls stretched. They weren't walls anymore. The whole building felt like it was bending, twisting around me, pulling me towards the elevator. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. A cold, suffocating presence, dragging me closer and closer. The hand on my shoulder squeezed tighter, forcing me down to my knees. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers were louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I wanted to turn around to see whatever was behind me, but deep down I knew that if I did, it'd be the last thing I ever saw. Just as the pressure became unbearable, the lights flickered on, and everything stopped. The elevator was closed. The lobby was empty. I staggered back to the security room, my legs shaking. I pulled up the camera feed, hoping to make sense of what had happened. But the footage was gone. It was like nothing had happened at all. But every night since, I felt it. The thing in the elevator. It's waiting for me. It's always there, just out of sight, just out of reach. Every time the lights flicker, every time I pass the elevator, I can feel it watching. And I know, one night, when the lights go out, it's gonna pull me in. I died in 1941, shortly after my daddy went off to war. I was just 15 and already sick when he was drafted. I think Mama knew I wasn't going to make it, and she begged Daddy to find a way out of the draft. I don't know if he tried or not, only that he left, and then I died a few weeks later. Mama took it hard. I watched her fall apart from behind the walls of our house. It was, at one point, a nice house. Then the letter came, saying that Daddy was killed by a Nazi's bullet. Mama couldn't take that at all. My Aunt Charlotte took Mama in to live with her, which probably saved her life. Sadly, I've lost touch with Mama since then. I suppose odds are pretty high that she's dead too by now. I think all the heartbreak around Daddy and me dying trapped my soul in this old house. And since Mama never sold it, I doubt she could have borne to. No one ever moved in. If she's dead, she apparently didn't will the house to anybody. It's still abandoned by all but me. It's a little ways out of town, trees and bushes that were just saplings when I was breathing are big, wild things now. They've never been pruned, not once. I can't go outside the house to have a look, but I bet it isn't even visible from the road. I'd guess the bank owns this place now, and they've just decided to let it rot. You know what, though? I'm glad. Because being in an old abandoned house is the only way I get to have any fun. How? The teenagers, friend. Teenagers started sneaking in here on dares back in the early 90s, right as the paint was beginning to peel. First, they threw rocks through all the windows. I didn't appreciate that, although I could see the fun in it. I haven't aged a day since I died, so I'm still a 15-year-old spirit. The very first pair who actually snuck in here were a couple of guys just older than me who were dared by their giddy girlfriends. As they crept around, these guys were whispering about whether or not the house was haunted. So I slammed the door and sent them running and screaming. Over time, I gave this place a reputation as a bona fide haunted house. Round October, each year, kids come, from other towns even, to experience my knocking and slamming. They all thought they could handle it, but I sent every one of them scurrying off. Something changed in the early 2000s. The teens started seeming less afraid of me, more curious. I couldn't scare them off as easily, which was fine since I enjoyed having them around. But they also started trying to talk to me. They bring in tape recorders and cameras to try to capture the stuff I do. I was always careful not to make anything move on camera, though. I liked how everyone else just had to take the kids I scared at their word. Providing proof of myself would have ruined the mystique. Some of the teenagers brought weird energy into the house. It was like having somebody track mud across the clean floor. Except instead of mud, it was anger, depression, jealousy, all sorts of ugly things. One thing you learn when you're dead is emotions are very tangible. They have a charge like a magnet or a battery. The right charge gives me energy, makes the house sort of hum. Some of the teens call it the house's aura or vibe. But if you bring the wrong charge in here, something too negative, messes everything up. I feel tired. The house feels older, and sometimes I can sense things moving outside. I don't mean outside like in the yard. I mean outside my spiritual periphery. See, ghosts like me are not the only type of spirit. There's some really dark stuff out there. Those dark spirits, well, they're attracted to negative energy. I sense them lurking, feel them sniffing out the anger and jealousy and sadness in here. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only thing keeping them out of this space. I am, in spite of everything, a pretty positive guy. There's one object which I will never ever allow into this house again. Whenever I see one, I immediately do something really scary, like make footsteps right behind the teenagers or brush at their hair. I do whatever I can to get them out of here. The object in question is something called a Ouija board. I hadn't never seen or heard of such a thing until the day I almost watched some poor kid lose his soul, and might have almost lost my house to an evil spirit. That, friend, after all of this existence, is a story I would like to tell you today. They came in a foursome: Gavin, Lily, Emma, and Roland. Gavin and Lily were the ghost enthusiasts. They came in with all the presuppositions one would expect from a couple of kids who think they know everything about a subject in which nothing is really known to the living. Emma didn't seem nearly as enthusiastic about the visit, even though she was the real empath in the group. That'll come in real handy for me later. You'll see. Now Roland made me uneasy. See, styles and fashion have changed so much since my time that I have difficulty reading people based on their appearance anymore. For example, 30 years ago, if someone crept in here at night wearing a pair of tattered jeans, I'd have assumed they were a junkie that needed to be chased out before they got too comfortable in my house. Nowadays, everybody's wearing jeans that look ready to fall apart. They're all the rage, as I've heard being hip called at one time or another. All this to say, I have to judge people by stuff that's intangible to the physical world, but potent to me. These things are like someone's mental balance or spiritual harmony. The closest thing I can compare these things to are smell, but you don't get them through your nose. You just kind of pick it up, much like when you drive by a hog farm and before you realize it, you're aware you're breathing in pig stink. Roland's pig stink comprised of grief, insecurity, and anger, disdain for the world and everything in it. I'm not a psychic, but I assumed right away that Roland had lost someone very close, probably recently. Roland had the spiritual posture of someone who's been personally insulted by death. The foursome crept around for a while, and I let them be. I wanted to feel them out. Between Emma's empathic abilities and whatever was going on with Roland, I guess I was sort of nervous about this bunch. Eventually they went upstairs and ended up in my room, of all places, the very room in which I died back in 41. That's when Lily pulled out the Ouija board, and I studied it while they all got comfortable, but I didn't really understand how it worked. Not until Gavin put this little triangle on the board that he called a planchette. Seeing the hole in the middle of the planchette, I understood how the letters on the board were laid out for spelling. The corners designated for yes or no. I found it a little strange that the board had a space for goodbye, but not one for hello. Anyway, I've become a master of suspense over the years, so I let the group play for a few minutes without a response. You know, what finally made me move the thing was that I wasn't sure I could. I wanted to find out. Started by just sliding it a tiny bit, not spelling anything or questioning and asking them anything. Boy, did that get my new friends excited. "Are you doing that?" Lily asked Emma, then Roland. Both shook their heads. Lily and Gavin shared a look. Then, all theatrically, she asked, "What's your name, spirit?" I could have spelled out something like Beelzebub or even Satan, but you have to build up to those sorts of things. Instead, I gave them my real name, B.O.B., Bob. I always went by Robert in life, but, well, Bob spells quicker. Hi, Bob, Gavin said, after the group simmered down. We've come here respectfully to try to get your story. We want to know about who you were, and if you'll tell us what the afterlife is like. Well, Gavin, it's pretty fun because I get to mess with people like you, I thought, as I slid the planchette straight to no. I was trying to put myself in mind of a dark spirit, and I imagined such a thing would be pretty standoffish. Oh, okay, Lily said. Is there anything you do want to tell us? Can you ask it about, Roland said. Well, we'll get there, don't worry, Gavin put in. I made him wait a few more seconds, then I slid the planchette around to spell not safe. Oh, spooky, right? I told you I was good at this. I'd never used an Ouija board before, but same rules applied. Take it slow, keep it vague, give them lots of time to speculate and doubt themselves. Not safe, Gavin asked, but more to the group than to me. Roland squirmed like he couldn't get comfortable, or like he knew something he wasn't sharing. His pig stink bloomed around him, billowing out of the top of his head like a smokestack. I didn't like it. Guys, can I be honest? Emma asked. I've actually been feeling a little unsafe, like something's off here. Maybe we should listen to what the board's saying. Oh, Emma, no, don't spoil the fun. I guess she was picking up on her friend Roland's negative energy, but she was attributing it to me, attempting to come across like someone warning the group of danger, rather than threatening the danger myself. So I moved the planchette around to spell trapped. As the group clamored about what that might mean, I decided to shake Gavin and Lily's confidence. I hovered over them both, plucked one hair from each of their heads. This took an immense amount of energy from me, but it was worth it. Both folded neatly in half on the floor. Then I dropped both their hairs onto the Ouija board. Pandemonium ensued. Gavin jumped to his feet. Lily slid back, elbows tripping. The other two stayed put, but sat up, stiff as corpses. All four were shouting and cursing and swearing. Do you want to hurt us? Emma asked, and dang it, I would have slid it to yes when they all touched the planchette again, if anyone else had asked, but I couldn't do that to poor Emma. I liked her. She seemed sweet, and the fact that she had a connection with the spirit realm, well, reminded me of how it felt to have my crush assigned as my lab partner in high school. It didn't mean anything was gonna happen between us, obviously. That would be ludicrous given my terminal case of death, but it made it feel more possible, I suppose. Like I said, I'm still 15. I slid the planchette to no. Can I ask something? That was Roland. Gavin gestured at him to go ahead after he sat back down. Have you been following me? Before I could answer, I felt myself pushed backwards by a soft but unmistakably powerful presence. The room's weight suddenly doubled. I'd never felt anything like this before. I'll never know what the living teens felt, but they all removed their hands from the planchette and leaned away from the board at the same moment. I stretched forward to move the planchette, realizing only later how that might have been the scariest thing I did that night. They all sat transfixed as I pushed the planchette around to spell careful. I wasn't trying to scare them, but I did worry a healthy dose of fear might be appropriate. I sensed movement from Roland's direction. He was looking down, staring at his own chest. Emma watched him closely. I believe she sensed what I saw. A shadow copy of Roland stood, rising from his body. At full height, he protruded from the boy's shoulders and neck. It stood well over 6 feet. It looked directly at me, held my gaze as it metamorphosed. Besides bearing Roland's general shape, it looked nothing like him. It was absolutely inhuman, with cheeks so thin and sunken I could see its jagged teeth outlined beneath the leathery skin. The eyes which held me were sunken far into the skull and as small as BBs, but they glowed brighter than anything else. The thing's smoky claws now commanded the planchette. Remember, Roland had asked the board if he was being followed. I was going to answer no before I was forced away by the new dark spirit. The dark spirit dragged the planchette towards yes, causing an anxious stir amongst the teenagers. It spelled safe now. The dark spirit's paper-thin lips parted slightly, and I could see pointed teeth as black as the rest of it. "Okay, that's good," Lily said. It says it's been following you, but that you're safe now, so that must mean it's like protecting you." "Yeah, that's definitely a good thing," Gavin agreed. "No, Gavin. No, Lily. It's not a good thing," I screamed at them, but, of course, they couldn't hear me. Emma glanced my way, though. The planchette started moving again, guided by the smoky claw of the figure protruding from Roland's back. It spelled Roland's name. Emma gripped his arm as if to anchor him. Then the dark spirit spelled out the cruelest, most obscene lie yet. "It's Mom." Again, the terrible figure sneered at me. I was now convinced that it was a demon. Emma's grip morphed into a sideways hug as she pulled poor Roland towards herself. He started crying. The other two exchanged nervous whispers, too quietly for even me to hear. The planchette began to move again, but I summoned every kilowatt of energy I could to reach through the pressure force field and stop it. The demon growled at me, and with a too long arm, it swiped me away. I spun backward like an astronaut through space. Emma sensed all of this. Still hugging Roland, she looked just above his head, exactly where the glowing demon protruded. "Mom, why did you do it?" Roland asked, voice choked by heartbreak. How could you just leave us like that?" This was real bad. I apologize for delaying what happened next, but you need to understand some things about death. See, there are different kinds of death. Mine was natural, but premature by natural standards. That sort of discrepancy, when combined with my mother's intense grief, created the environment which trapped me here. A death by human hands, be it murder or suicide, tears a hole through the separation between the living and the dead, like a bullet punched through paper. The holes take a long time to heal, if it ever does, and while it's open, just about anything can pass through. All this to say, the demon which had infested Roland had probably crawled through the hole left by his mother and attached itself to him. I bet it offered comfort at first, but judging by Roland's demeanor, even before the Ouija board session, it had already started getting mean. Classic demon trickery. If it could convince Roland to welcome it by pretending to be his mother's ghost, there's no telling how far it could take the possession. It might even kill Roland and harvest his soul. So when we left off, Roland, believing he was talking to his mother, had just asked how she could leave him. The demon began to answer, but I focused on getting the teens to safety. If I couldn't save Roland, then I wanted to at least try to protect the others. I'll admit, in the back of my mind, I was wondering what would happen if that demon fully manifested in my house. It had already demonstrated immense power over me, and that frightened me, for my own safety too. In the corporeal world, demons enter people. They dwell inside them and control them. Demons don't have that sort of use for us. Instead of possessing, they envelop and dominate us. They show us how little power and control we really have. I circumvented the group until I was behind Emma. That also put me right next to the demon, but it was occupied with the planchette, or maybe it didn't see me as a threat. Emma was the key. Her empathetic ability was the only tool I had left, but I wasn't sure how to use it. She'd shown that she could hear me, but could she understand? I didn't think so. I wondered if she might sense my touch. Keeping an eye on the demon, I took hold of Emma's free wrist, the one that wasn't on Roland's shoulder. She immediately flinched away. I understood why, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. I tried again, this time only touching the back of her hand, and I projected my desire to save her and her friends. I even whispered to her, "I'm here to protect you." At least one of these tactics worked, and Emma allowed my hand to stay. I slid my thumb behind hers so I could gently guide her hand to the Ouija board. "No, Emma, leave it alone," Gavin said. "God, that idiot, purporting to be so keen on the spirit world, yet being so dully insensitive to it." I could have punched him. I gave Emma a reassuring squeeze, which she emphatically understood. I guided Emma's hand towards the word goodbye at the bottom of the board and gave her another squeeze, then let her go. I felt confident that she would know what to do. "Guys, I think we need to end this," she said, her hand hovering over goodbye. "No!" Roland shouted, a deep anger boiling beneath his voice. "It's not his mother," I whispered to Emma, and thank the Lord she could understand me. Enough to matter, at least. Emma now pleaded with Gavin and Lily. "We need to end this session right now, guys. Something's really wrong. I can feel it." "I need to talk to her," Roland argued. "Roland, I don't think your mom is talking. I think it's something bad," Emma said, turning to him. "Yeah, she might be right," Lily said. "Before it said it was your mom, it was telling us we weren't safe and all that, remember?" Words can't describe how grateful I was to hear my silly prank may have saved the day. "Oh, yeah, spirits do lie to get what they want sometimes," Gavin said. "I can feel her, though," Roland whispered, but he sounded unsure. Emma's hand went to the planchette. Again, the demon's shadows clawed. I noticed her hand was outlined by a faint white aura. Whatever energy gave Emma her emphatic ability was something wholesome and beautiful. It forced the demon to retract angrily, almost like it had been burned. Gavin touched the planchette again, then Lily. They all looked at Roland, but he didn't move. Emma took his hand in her free one and pulled it towards the planchette. He still clearly did not want to end the session, but he allowed this to happen. They all four of them were touching the planchette. Emma slid it to goodbye, and as if it had never been there, the demon vanished. I whispered thanks to Emma, but closing the session had dulled her connection to me. I'll admit this made me a little sad, despite the victory we had won. The teenagers left shortly after, and I haven't seen them since. That must have been, 10 years ago now. It's hard to keep track. Roland didn't seem any lighter when he left that night. Unfortunately, I have to assume that he still had the attachment. But with a friend like Emma by his side, I hope he's been able to rid himself of it. Can't imagine she would have let him go on like that. The white light I saw around her hand made it easy to believe she saved him. And, like I already mentioned, Ouija boards aren't allowed in my house anymore. These days, kids are using all kinds of electronic equipment, though, and the Ouija board seems to be getting less popular. That's good. You just can never know what's really talking to you with one of those things. It could be a swell guy like me, or could be something much, much darker. It's best just to keep those channels closed. You can't ever really know who or what is speaking to you from the other side. When I was in the 4th grade, I met this kid called James. He was a little weird, a bit more than anything, but once I got to know him, he seemed like a cool guy. The thing that stood out to me the most was how good he was at voice impersonations. A little too good, in fact. I wouldn't mistake his voice acting for the person that he was imitating if it wasn't for the fact that it came out of his mouth. However, there was one incident that made me want to stay away from the kid. Typing this out 15 years later, it still sends shivers down my spine. I still don't have an explanation for it, and quite frankly, I'd rather not have one. It was the night before Christmas break, December 12th at my school. As usual, we would go out to have snowball fights and go downhill with the sledge. You know, normal kid stuff. As I was collecting snow, I got a call from a distance. "Hey Thomas, time to go home, let's go." It sounded exactly like my mom, but when I turned around, I saw James giggling while hiding behind a mountain of snow. That was strange. I could have sworn that voice came from at least 30 feet away. But looking at James, he was definitely no farther than 6 feet. "Geez, I thought you were my mom for a sec," I said, pouting. James burst out laughing. "Caught you again. You're so easy to trick sometimes." "Shut up," I said. I was a little pissed at how good his impersonations were, but then again, it was funny to troll other people with, especially the teachers. More time passed by, and eventually, the teachers actually did call us over to let us know that my mom was picking us up. Our plan was to have a sleepover before Christmas break began. My mom picked us up in her car and drove us home. We were left alone with a babysitter for the night, since she had to go to work on her afternoon job, plus her night shift. She was a single mom juggling 3 jobs, so it isn't necessarily easy for her. James and I were in the playroom for a while before nighttime came. Bedtime was coming up, but knowing James, he was going to find a way to stay up and perform some kind of shenanigans. Our babysitter, Jackie, walked in and tucked us into bed, both mattresses on the floor, before turning off the lights and shutting the door. It was silent for a good few minutes before James' intrusive thoughts got the better of him. "Psst, Thomas," he whispered. "You up?" I turned around to face him. "Yeah, what's up?" Even though it was dark, I could sense James's devious grin. Clearly, he'd thought of some crazy idea. Clearing his throat, he spoke. "You want to play a game?" His voice caught me off guard. He perfectly impersonated the voice of my crush at the time, Hannah. Again, I could have mistaken it for her, if it wasn't for the fact that I could see James's face right in front of me. "You asshole, you would use her voice on me like that." I slapped his shoulder. He had his face buried in his pillow, holding in laughter. James's voice went back to normal. "Let's play Find and Listen," he proposed. For context, Find and Listen was a game James made up when we first met. I don't know if he'd had the idea before, but I'd rather not know. The game was that you would stand in the middle of the dark hallway and see what your eyes would start making up to scare the crap out of you. It was a really weird game, I know, but we were kids, and James was, well, James. So I went along with it, me and my naive mind. "You should go first," James said, grinning. "I'll buy you a pack of Oreos if you do." "Fine," I replied, getting up. Tiptoeing, I peeked under the door to see if Jackie was still awake. To our amusement, all the lights in the house were turned off, and I couldn't hear the TV, so I slowly creaked the door open. The coast was clear. Taking a deep breath, I stood in the middle of the hallway in silence, staring into the darkness. It was silent for the first few minutes. Even James, who would usually already be laughing his butt off, was completely quiet. Besides the dark walls getting bigger and smaller as I looked around, nothing abnormal happened at first. The first weird thing came soon after. Slight breathing was heard from far away. It wasn't any breathing I recognized, though. Eventually, the sound went from breathing to a subtle groan. A very, very deep groan. I started feeling pressure on my chest, as if someone's entire weight was slamming against it. My breath shortened, body shaking. Whatever I was feeling, I certainly didn't think that I was safe at that very moment. As time went on, my heartbeat increased by the minute, until eventually I could feel it in my throat. James, are you still there? I'm scared," I whimpered, my body shaking even more in discomfort. He didn't respond, but I knew he was, because I saw his silhouette still laying down on the bed, sitting crisscrossed. I then felt something brush my shoulder. Jolting, I turned around to see nothing but the other side of the dark hallway. "James," I said, trying to hold the lump of tears in my throat. Again, no response. No matter where I was turning around, I could feel a passive presence behind me, a pressure that I never felt before. I closed my eyes and curled into a ball. However, the pressure only got worse. "James, can the game be over now?" I asked, tears forming in my eyes. This time I did get a response, but it wasn't James's voice. It was a soft girl's voice, and it had a slight echo to it. "I thought you were having fun," it said. "James, seriously, stop," I said, a bit louder. The pressure from behind me switched to the right of me. I could feel something right in front of me, staring at me with an intense glare. Hot breath simmered across my chest. It smelt bad, horrific even. "Come on, why don't we play together?" asked the same female voice. A gentle hand ran its fingers across my shoulder. I tensed up, my whole body, holding my breath. Even though I was used to James's impersonations, this pressure felt different, paranormal. The voice then went from gentle to a deep-throated growl. "It's okay," it said. Suddenly, I began feeling lightheaded. My consciousness began leaving me. It was a strange feeling I can't yet comprehend, even after so many years. The best way I could describe it is when you start seeing stars and feeling lightheaded after getting up too fast, combined with my head getting pulled upwards. I gasped and opened my eyes, and there it was, a dark figure with piercing red eyes and sharp teeth grinning right at me, its face longer than a console table. I let out a blood-curdling scream, tears running down my face. Almost instantly, the lights to the hallway turned on, and Jackie, the babysitter, ran up to me, asking if I was okay in a panic. I was paralyzed, petrified. My eyes were widened, my body still shaking, tears still dripping down my cheek. Next to Jackie was James, his face looking just as terrified. However, something about him felt off. His eyes were glowing a little more than usual. Not too much, but in a weird way, as if the glow was residue, slowly diminishing into nothing. Although barely noticeable, I could see it. James's glare was too familiar to me, but if that was the case, then what did I see? Why did it look so different to the James that I knew? I couldn't sleep that night. I insisted that the lights in the house stay on until my mom came in to pick me up. I slept next to her that night, and James was sent home early. He didn't come back after Christmas break. No one knows why James's family decided to leave without saying a single word after that. Not only did he leave the school, but the city. Strangely enough, no one's heard from him since. 15 years later, I still can't explain what happened that night. Like, James's eyes were glowing, his overly perfect voice impersonations, his strange personality, the eerie games that he liked to play. But one thing's for sure, I'd rather not have any answers to any of it. Hey man, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's people in the basement. Chris's words were somewhere between silence and a whisper. I sat in the bed, my eyes adjusting to the frantic figure in front of me. What? What are you talking about? Shh, quiet, dude. There's people in the basement. Like 6 of them. Swear to God. He paused, taking a few deep breaths. We should get out of here, like right now. I rubbed my eyes, trying to get the fatigue to settle so I could comprehend the magnitude of what he was saying. For context, my friends and I booked an Airbnb near the mountains for the weekend. We were here to hike and drink, get our minds off work and school. I had been super tired after hiking, so I had taken a little nap. I shook my head. "You went down to the basement? We weren't supposed to. They told us not to." Yeah, dude, I know, but I did it anyway, and I saw people down there, and we need to leave now." "What kind of people?" I asked, pretty much fully awake now. "You mean the owners of the place? They came back?" Chris shook his head. "Nah, not them. Weird-looking people. Creepy-looking people." I sat up, thinking that maybe Chris had taken some of the LSD we'd been saving for the next day. "Dude, relax. Explain to me what you saw." He laid it out pretty concisely, despite the fact that the people who had posted the listing had explicitly told us not to go down there. Chris had gotten drunk, gotten curious, and went down to have a look. To his surprise, the door had been unlocked. He couldn't find the light switch, but there was just enough of it coming through the windows for him to be able to make his way downstairs. Arriving at the bottom, he allowed his eyes a few seconds to adjust, and right in front of him, he could see a small table with about 6 people sitting around it, their outlines illustrated by the afternoon light. At first, his brain rationalized it as a large bunch of dolls or puppets that had been placed down there, but he continued looking at them, and eventually, one of them turned their head to face him. He didn't stick around after that and shot up the stairs, shutting the door behind him. As he told me this, I kind of didn't want to believe him, but there was also absolutely no reason for him to be lying about it. He just wasn't that kind of guy. Coupled with the genuine terror on his face, I began leaning towards the idea that he was telling the truth, and that there was actually a bunch of people sitting silently at a table in the darkness of the basement. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, seeing Jay and Paul standing on the front porch grilling burgers. Then I looked back at Chris. "If you're telling me the truth, then we need to call the people who own the place." "I tried. They don't pick up. I've sent them texts too." I shook my head. "So what? You think they're dangerous? Should we call the cops?" Chris shrugged. "I don't know. I don't know if they're dangerous, but they sure as hell didn't look right, and I want to get out of here." For a while, we stared at each other, the general silence of the house becoming progressively more ominous. After a while, I sighed. "Yeah, I guess. Let's get out of here." We grabbed our phones, wallets, and car keys and moved downstairs, out of the house as fast as we could. Jay and Paul were laughing, holding beers as we approached them. Paul turned around, pointing a greasy spatula at us. "You guys hungry or what?" Chris began telling them what he'd seen, but it was obvious that they were more than a few drinks deep and weren't taking anything he was saying seriously. "Dude, sounds like you're tripping," Jay said. "You sure you're not tripping?" "I'm being serious. I swear to God I'm serious. We need to get out of here, like right now." "Well, I'm about 5 beers in, so I ain't driving," Jay said. "And I sure as hell ain't letting any of you guys drive my truck. You sure you weren't just seeing stuff?" "Fine, I'm walking then," Chris said. "I'm not staying here." Look, I'll go down there and talk to them," Paul said, half joking. "See what the hell they want." Jay laughed as sheer disbelief washed over Chris's face. "I'm not bullshitting, man. I'm not," he said. Yeah, I believe you," Paul said dismissively. "I'll go see what's up." Chris continued to protest, but Paul wouldn't budge, and soon he was inside the house, making his way towards the basement. Chris shook his head, his eyes wide, nearly bulging out of his skull at this point. "Screw this," he yelled, seeming to grow more agitated by the second. "I warned you guys." Before we could say anything else, he bolted, sprinting like a bat out of hell towards the woods. We tried chasing after him, but couldn't come close to matching his speed. We stopped, panting for air, as we watched him disappear into the tree line. "What the hell?" Jay asked. "Is he being serious? I thought it was a joke." I shook my head. "Let's go check on Paul." We ran back to the house, entering to see the basement door wide open. The place was completely silent, but before I could call out, I heard someone moving up the stairs. I backed up, unsure of what to expect or how to react, when Paul came out of the darkness, looking somewhat bewildered. He looked at us and shook his head. "That's freaky, man. Was he being real? There's people down there?" Not exactly. The three of us went down there, with my nerves yet to be completely settled. We couldn't find a light switch, but there were enough windows and enough daylight for us to move around. Turns out, Chris hadn't been totally correct, but he probably hadn't been lying either. Planted right in front of the stairs was a table with 3 chairs. Sitting in those 3 chairs were some of the most lifelike sculptures I'd ever seen. 2 soldiers in what appeared to be old military outfits, and a woman in some kind of long religious dress. They weren't quite enough to be uncanny. If you looked at them for more than a few seconds, you could tell that they were carved from stone and then meticulously painted, something you could confirm by touching them. Still, they were exceptionally crafted, something that could have only been achieved by a dedicated professional. "I mean, I don't blame him," Paul said, referring to Chris. "I almost shat bricks when I first saw him. I mean, what the hell?" I remembered back to the conversation I'd had with him, how he'd claimed that one of them had actually looked at him, and then a shiver went down my spine. Che laughed, a palpable relief in his voice. "How much you think these sell for?" "I'm down to take them and find out," Paul joked. On the surface, it made enough sense. The homeowners were in possession of some very valuable items that they'd stored in the basement, simply forgetting to lock it this time around. Jay and Paul continued looking at them, taking pictures, marveling at how weird it was. On the other hand, I wasn't so keen on doing so. I wanted to get the hell out of the basement ASAP. The details just weren't adding up. I knew Chris well. If the only thing he'd seen had been these statues, he wouldn't have reacted the way he did. Jay was looking at his phone, smiling at the pictures he'd taken, when suddenly his expression dropped. He put his phone down and looked ahead. There's another one over there, in the corner," he said. "What you mean?" Paul asked, looking closely at one of the soldiers' rifles. "It's another statue, in the corner." Paul looked up and looked towards where Jay was pointing. "Oh, yeah, I see it." The 2 of them continued to look at it, but showed no indication of wanting to explore it. Instead, they stood still, their expressions slowly being taken over by a look of deep unease. Eventually, I looked as well. It did appear to be a statue, something tucked away in one of the very dark corners. It was tall, extremely tall, maybe 7 feet, its head well eclipsing the top of one of the bookshelves. Its bottom half was completely obscured, but for what the light was revealing, it was wearing some kind of helmet, like one of the steel ones the soldiers were equipped with back in World War I. There came a point, as my eyes were adjusting to the darkness, where a pit began to form in my stomach. Its features were slowly revealing themselves, and it almost looked as if it were twitching. I thought that maybe it was just the darkness playing tricks on me, until I saw it blink. Clear as day, it blinked. I guess the other 2 saw the same thing, because they were practically trampling each other as they ran up the stairs. We slammed the door shut behind us before quickly pushing one of the couches in front of it. Paul and I were halfway out the front door, but Jay was still in the house. "The hell are you doing?" Paul yelled at him. "Come on." "I want my laptop," Jay said, throwing Paul the keys. "I'll be quick. Start the truck." He ran up the stairs while Paul continued to curse at him. "Really, dude? Are you serious?" Then I remembered my own laptop, thinking about how annoying it would be if I were to lose it. I looked at the basement door, then at the stairs, and then at Paul. "That'll take 5 seconds, tops," I said. I could hear him cursing behind me as I ran, jumping 3 steps at a time until I reached my room, darting in and grabbing my laptop from the desk. As I rushed out of there, I saw that the door to Jay's room was shut. I stopped, slowed my breathing. I was almost certain that he hadn't gone back downstairs. I would have seen or heard him. I approached the door. "Jay, the hell are you doing?" No response. I looked at the door, but every muscle was frozen, almost as if my body were warning me not to go in. Suddenly it creaked open, just slightly, and I jumped back. "Jay?" I asked. Still no response. I couldn't see anything through the crack until my eyes drifted upward, toward the ceiling. A pair of eyes looked down at me, large eyes set too far apart on a face with skin that was much too pale. I turned and bolted back downstairs as I heard the door swinging open the rest of the way. Of course I didn't look back and ran outside, just jumping into the passenger seat of the truck. "Where is he?" Paul asked. "Just drive," I told him. He didn't protest and stepped on the gas, ripping down the dirt road. We continued driving until we reached a rest stop, the first place with other people. By that point, we both called or messaged the homeowners about a dozen times. Nothing but radio silence on their end. We even noticed that the listing itself had been removed from the Airbnb entirely. Then we called the police. Somebody answered, and I explained the situation as in-depth as I could. The operator listened without interrupting, waited a few seconds, and then asked for the address. I told it to her. Another bout of silence elapsed before she hung up. After arriving back in the city, we considered reporting it again, but neither of us had the nerve to do so. We also hadn't heard from Chris. We've gone to his apartment and knocked on his door, but nobody answers. I tried to do some research on the place, Googling the cabin's address. One result came up, a website that appeared to consist solely of an album of black and white images of soldiers standing in various places, with dates and addresses written beneath them in small text. I Control-F'd it and found the address I was looking for. The accompanying photo was of a tall soldier holding a blood-stained hatchet and standing in a clearing surrounded by trees, with the outline of a cabin behind him. The man's skin was pale, his eyes oddly large, and set so wide apart that it just didn't look right. There were also 2 dates attached to it, August 17th, 1915, and the date that we had first arrived at the cabin. It's been about a week removed from the incident, and Paul and I have made the mutual decision to drop it, to try and go back to our ordinary lives. But it's been difficult. I keep expecting to receive a phone call from the cops, asking me questions about Chris or Jay, where I'd last seen them, at least. Those guys have families. They probably knew where they were heading, and who they'd gone with. Yet nobody has reached out. Doesn't feel like we're out of the clearing here. Doesn't feel like this is over at all. I would love to simply study at home, but it's tough to concentrate for more than a few minutes when your parents are arguing 24/7 in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. I'm the type of guy who needs to focus for hours to consider it productive. Despite everything, the screaming would have been more than worth it if I had anticipated the following events. The night of the incident was Friday. It was 4 days prior to my final chemistry exam before the Christmas break. I walked into the study hall at 11:43 p.m. and greeted the old man who was sitting at the information desk. He also happened to be the man who funded the study hall, so whenever he asked me to reiterate the mandatory rules, which was every time I walked in, regardless on whether it was the first or the 500th time, I had no choice but to do it. Let me get you up to speed on these rules. I'll spare you the details and only tell you about the most important ones. Make sure every single light in the study hall is on until you leave. When you leave, make sure the door sign says closed. When leaving, make sure you are illuminated at all times. Never, and I mean never, turn off a light that's above you. Make sure you're not in the dark either, not even for a split second. If it's still dark out, do not forget to lock the door when you walk out. If the sun's already out by the time you leave, I'll lock it myself. Just leave it. If I hear any humming, ignore it. Do not go check or look at what it is. I never heard anyone humming outside the study hall, but rules is rules. Never pick up the phone for anyone after I leave, no matter what. This never happened either. Do not, I repeat, do not stay in the study hall after 6 a.m. You're not allowed to come back until 9 a.m. After reiterating the rules that have been drilled into me more than the periodic table, I dapped up the old man before sitting down. I always sat down in the same seat. The first few hours went by in a flash, as always. However, I got disrupted at 2:30 a.m. That's because it's when the old man goes home for the night, leaving the massive study hall to, well, just me. Today, I chose to hang around for a little longer. Quite frankly, I didn't want to get another slap from my parents after realizing I got an A- on my final exam. I had to remain focused and study for a little longer. A few hours more, which felt more like 10 minutes, went by. The clock had finally hit 5:55 a.m. I wouldn't have realized it if it wasn't for the alarm I set for myself. Jolting myself back to reality, I began to set everything up to make sure I didn't upset the old man. He can get a little cranky sometimes. My brain was completely fried. My vision was blurry too. I packed my bags and turned off all the lights in the necessary order to ensure that I stayed true to the rules. I've done this so many times that I didn't even have to think about it anymore. As I opened the front entrance, I turned off the final light. Concurrently, the clock hit 6 a.m. It was still dark outside, as dark as when I came in at 11:43 p.m. Inhaling the cold, fresh air of the countryside, I stuttered as I heard a loud ringing sound piercing my eardrums. It was the rotary phone on the old man's desk. "Shit," I muttered under my breath. I didn't expect it to be so loud. I rubbed my eyes and yawned. Unfortunately, that only made my eyes heavier. I should turn it off before I call it a night. Taking a step back inside, I gasped as I remembered that I had to turn on the lights whenever I was inside. I did so, accordingly, before reaching out to the phone. Realization struck me as one of the rules popped back into my head, making me stop. Never pick up the phone for anyone after I leave. Oh, right, I thought to myself. Better for me to leave it. I sighed and scratched the back of my head. Can't wait to finally sleep, I told myself, yawning. As I turned back around, my ears picked up on a sound from far away. A sound that kept getting louder by the second, although only slightly. I don't know why, but the sound alone sent shivers down my spine, waking me up instantly. It echoed across the study hall. As it got louder, I felt an insane pressure weighing down on me. It felt similar to the pressure one gets during sleep paralysis. As I felt my chest being crushed, I deeply inhaled and exhaled. I looked back at my shaky palms, eyes widening. What the hell, I thought to myself. What's wrong with me? It was a strange sensation, one I had never felt before. Everything felt off, eerie. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud coming from behind me, the sound of a heavy object crashing onto the ground. Instinctually, I turned around and jumped backwards, screaming. On the other side of the hall stood a shadowy figure. It was over 8 feet tall. Its lankiness was towering over me, its arms looking long enough to reach out and grab my head. It's where the humming tunes were coming from. At that very moment, I felt completely unsafe, as if the figure was going to jump out at me. All I could hear was my heart beating in my throat. "Screw this," I shouted. I turned around, bolting out the door, not even looking back once. As I was running, I could feel something chasing after me from behind. Despite that, I couldn't hear anything besides my breathing and quiet grunting. As soon as I made it home, I slammed the door shut and locked it. Throughout the night, my mind was racing with different thoughts. No matter what, I couldn't take the feeling that something was close to me, keeping an eye on me from nearby. Whenever I tried to close my eyes, I could see the figure rushing towards me at a speed I couldn't visualize. Before it could catch me, I opened my eyes with a loud gasp. However, the pressure persisted. Who was the figure standing on the other side of the hall? It looked nothing like the old man. Eventually, I dozed off and woke up a few hours later to a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, you that kid who always goes to the study hall every night?" it wrote. My heart skipped a beat. I chose to ignore it. No way I was going to let it trouble me because of some stupid rules. It must have been my nerves of the exam coming up. As I see the same number typing again, I blocked it. I had no interest in getting involved in whatever I'd seen yesterday. That night, I readied myself for another study session. I decided that I would leave the study hall at the same time as the old man to avoid a similar situation. He left about 2:30 a.m. I wanted to tell him about last night, but I was scared that I would get in trouble. I nervously walked to the study hall and greeted the old-timer. However, something felt off. He was staring into my eyes a lot more intently than usual, even after I recited the rules again to reassure him. He didn't seem mad or anything, just off. I figured it was paranoia. No way he could know anything about yesterday, right? After all, I didn't break any rules, and he wasn't even there for most of it, right? I sat down at the same chair as last night. Discomfort grew as I glanced to see the old man staring right at me from his seat. I took a deep breath and put on my earphones. Minutes later, I received a text. It was from the old man. I had his contact saved just in case, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to receive a message from him. However, why would he text me when he was right here in the room? "Hey, I wanted to let you know that I'm running some errands out of town at the moment. I think you've been in the study hall enough times for me to trust you alone for one night. Don't mess anything up. I'll be back Monday morning," it wrote. My heart stopped as I read it. Running errands out of town. I started shaking, rereading it over and over again. Running errands out of town. I slowly looked up, the old man at the information desk, still staring right at me. The pressure I felt on my chest last night came back. The light started to flicker subtly as my breathing became shallower and quicker. My body tensed up, and I was paralyzed. Out of town. If that's the case, then who am I in the study hall with? Nathaniel's fingers trembled as his callous hands gripped the shovel handle. Its rusty edge plunged into the earth beneath him. The graveyard was bathed in an eerie fog. An orange glow from the gas lamp cast long, twisted shadows along the cast-iron gates and the cracked headstones. He tried not to look at the name etched into the gravestone below him. Eliza Wilkins, beloved wife. It had been 5 years since she passed, leaving him a widower at the tender age of 32. The pain still felt like a gaping, open wound. In her absence, addiction had taken hold. Nathaniel wished he'd been a stronger man, but the stable reflection of his past had shattered soon after his beloved's death. His money dried up, along with any job prospects in this forsaken town. Nathaniel had resorted to robbing the graves of the wealthy, prying jewelry from brittle dead hands and selling it to those who would buy it in the seedy underbelly of this town. At first, he wasn't caught up in a moral dilemma, robbing only the most nefarious dead: corrupt politicians, crime bosses, other known deviants. But those plots had long since been cleaned out. The black markets didn't pay what his plunder was worth, nor did it cover the expenses of his living and his ever-growing addiction. Now his shovel scraped against the hollowed ground where his beloved Eliza rested. "Forgive me," he whispered, as he took a swig from his flask and dove the blade of his shovel into the soil. To both his relief and his dismay, the earth was softer than he expected. With haste, he uncovered the top of the casket. It sat, staring at him in the moonlight. The orange glow of the gas lamps flickered off of it and shimmered in the pools of tears that welled in his eyes. Warm streaks formed on his dirt-covered cheeks. The casket lid creaked open with an ominous, rusty groan. Nathaniel's heart pounded, dreading yet yearning to see her face one more time. To his surprise, she was far more intact than he would have ever imagined. What he thought would have been the skeletal remains of his wife's corpse were instead much more preserved, still decayed and mangled from the passage of time, but still very much intact as well. Again, he quenched his thirst from the flask. More tears streamed down his cheeks as he reached down to remove Eliza's wedding ring. The ring he'd bought in what felt like a different life. Something began to move underneath her burial dress. Startled, he pulled his hand back, ready to strike whatever creature emerged from the fabric. A low, gurgling moan left Eliza's lips, and her milky, accusing eyes shot open. Maggots squirmed from the cavities on her face, and her jaw creaked open as her moaning intensified. She sat up and began to twist and contort. Then he heard flesh tearing and saw a gush of black fluid pour from the bottom of her dress. Some abominable spawn slithered from Eliza. It convulsed and unfurled in a burst of grotesque afterbirth. This thing was both human and insectile. It held the shape of an infant, but had more blinking eyes covering the front of its face. Thin, wiggling tendrils fell from its mucousy orifice of a mouth and flopped against the wood of the casket like a fish out of water. Coarse hair, still covered in the vile afterbirth, wiggled and shifted on its skin. All of its eyes darted in different directions, frantically seeming to search for something unseen. Its darting eyes stopped and locked onto Nathaniel all at once. His mouth, agape in horror, quickly filled with several writhing tendrils that fell from the mouth of the infant creature. An intense breath left him as the memories of his past grave desecrations came rushing back in kaleidoscopic shards. Tendrils went deeper into him. For a brief moment, the creature was beautiful. It was as if he was seeing visions from beyond the veil of mortality, projected by an eldritch being plucked from the most unimaginable abyss. Everything went black. Then again, he was shown a flowing collage of his past defilements, of sacred resting places. Each one of his memories came back all at once, as if he were looking through the many eyes of the creature itself. Nathaniel thought the creature was a blasphemy against the cycle of life and death, as were his many misdeeds. A profound disgust churned within him as he finally understood the full consequences of his actions. He had exploited the hallowed ground for its resources. Each tombstone marked a lifetime of experience, personality, and memories that he had sullied. These resting places were meant to guide those who passed through the ether like the setting sun or the changing of the seasons. What Nathaniel had done was an affront to nature itself, an insult to the natural order of life and death. Guilt washed over him as he realized the torment of the restless spirits he had left in his wake. The tormented souls he'd disturbed were now bound to the mortal plane, lingering, restless. Something snapped inside him. The visions in Nathaniel's mind froze and then shattered like stained glass windows being pelted by stones. He felt the twitching tendrils slide from his throat and out his mouth. As his sight returned, Nathaniel saw finger-sized larvae emerging from the dirt around him. Fat, bloated grubs. They were covered in a green, glowing mucus that mingled with the light of his gas lamp. Eliza was still moaning loudly, and the creature that came from her seemed to be gasping for air. Many more larvae began to fall from the dirt walls all around him, piling in and all around the casket. They reeked of decay, and Nathaniel almost choked on his vomit. He watched in revulsion and fascination as they began to burrow into Eliza. They became a blanket of undulating flesh, writhing in the gloom of the moonlight and the gas lamps, and soon they would be upon him. Nathaniel quickly grabbed onto the dangling roots and used protruding stones as footholds as he climbed from the grave. Some of the larvae had attached themselves to his dirt-covered pants, and he flailed his legs violently as he pulled himself out of the hole. Horror gripped him, but he also battled with the lingering guilt of the visions he had been shown. More warm, salty paths appeared on his grime-covered cheeks as he scrambled to his feet. He looked back and saw Eliza peeking over the edge of her grave, covered in a wriggling blanket of glowing grubs. She screamed, and Nathaniel started to run. He fled blindly into the night, Eliza's voice echoing through the graveyard, and the shrieks of the spirits he had disturbed reverberated through his mind. He ran until he could run no longer, finally collapsing by a gnarled oak tree in a park on the outskirts of town. Huddled beneath the twisted branches, he wept. The sun's first rays came over the horizon, and the warm light hit his face. His nightmare of an evening had come to an end. The cycle of night and day continued. Rays of sun shot between the planks of a small fence on the perimeter of the park. They made straight lines of light on the grass around him. Then he realized time moves just like the light, in a straight line. He couldn't change the things that he had done, but Nathaniel knew what he must do. He would become a gravekeeper and work to restore and maintain the sacred spaces he had desecrated. The branches of the oak tree in front of him swayed in the morning breeze. He reached out and touched the tree's trunk. In death, all things reunite as equals under the bark of mortality's great tree. Each branch a life, each leaf a soul. The dispatcher said 2 kids, a boy and a girl, showed up on a lady's doorstep. Lady said the kids wouldn't talk or give their names. She gave them milk and cookies and sent them to rest in her bed because they looked tired. No children had been reported missing, but it was late, so the dispatcher thought the parents probably didn't know their kids were gone. No problem. Not my first call about kids that walked out the front door because they wanted to play. At least it wasn't winter. I drove to the house on the outskirts of Bridal Veil Lake. It looked like another farm sold off for condos that were never built. A bunch of wild fields and dirt surrounded the lady's house. It was remote and dark, and I wondered if she felt comfortable living alone out here. That knock in the middle of the night must have been a shock. I announced my presence and knocked lightly. "Hello?" An old woman, the lady, answered. "Hello?" "Hello, how are you doing tonight, ma'am?" "Been better. They're in the bedroom, sleeping, I think." She stepped inside and let me in. I saw 2 shapes beneath a quilt in the darkened bedroom. "There was no one else? You didn't see anybody?" She shook her head. "Were they injured? Scared?" "No, just shy. Really shy." She nodded towards the kitchen, which I could see from where I stood, not being a big house. "They hardly ate." There were 2 neat piles of chocolate chip cookies beside full cups of milk. It all looked completely untouched. The sight made me antsy. She said they didn't eat much. They ate something, but not a crumb had fallen on the table. Nuh-uh, I have 3 kids of my own. I never saw them leave a cookie intact at all. Something really bad must have happened to those children. "Hey, kids," I said quietly from the doorway of the bedroom. I didn't want to startle them. "You awake?" No answer, but I had to check on them. There was only a lamp for the room, and it barely lit anything. 2 small shapes lay with their bodies and heads covered with the quilt, completely still. "I'm a policeman. I'm here to help you. You don't have to be scared." I waited, but still nothing. "I'm gonna pull off the blanket very slowly, just so you can see me, okay? Then you can put it right back if that makes you feel safe." Nothing. They didn't move a muscle. I prepared for the worst and pulled off the quilt. Their eyes were black, shiny, lifeless. Jesus! Because these were not living children, but full-size dolls, complete with clothes and realistic hair. Only the eyes and their plastic faces looked immediately fake. What the hell? I stomped out, admittedly pissed. The lady waited in her living room chair. "Is this a joke?" "Excuse me?" "Those aren't real kids. They're dolls," I said. She seemed confused. "I beg your pardon?" I took a breath and tried to calm myself. Ma'am, are you on medication or... Jesus Christ, save us! She got up and went to the bedroom. I shouldn't have let her see. The lady fainted at the foot of the bed. I called it in, and everybody had a good laugh about the dolls. Except for me. The lady had been prescribed blood thinners and a nasal spray for seasonal allergies. Unless she did other non-prescribed drugs, she had nothing hallucinogenic in her system. That meant she probably had a tumor or dementia or something. Gas leak could have also been a possibility. I mulled over those details while I escorted the ambulance to the hospital. She wasn't conscious for long, but didn't fight my suggestions to see a doctor. Thank you, she said from the stretcher, squeezing my hand just before the paramedics wheeled her into the ER. I nodded. I didn't know what to say, but it was my job to help. I followed them in. Sometimes doctors want to ask questions. The cafeteria called to me. 4 more hours till the end of my shift. Coffee and a sandwich seemed prudent. I hardly touched them. The walkie crackled. There had been an assault at the hospital. Obviously, I responded. Someone's been attacked, dispatch said. The nurse that called wasn't very clear, and she hung up. I got up from the table about the same time a doctor descended the steps into the food court and shouted something incomprehensible. When he got close, I grabbed him by the shoulders. She's dead. Gone. He killed her, the doctor said. It took a bit for me to understand. I'll summarize. The old lady I'd escorted to the hospital had been murdered by another patient. A young man suffering from unmedicated schizophrenia. He'd been brought into the ER after being hit by a car. I thought he was sleeping, the doc had told me. He sat on the floor with his head in his hands. Oh God, her head. He damn near cut her head off. Apparently, he walked down the hallway with it. Then he sat down and chatted with staff until the police arrived. I never left the food court, so I was spared the scene. Still messed me up. She thanked me. I'd sent her to her grisly death. A tragedy. That's what everyone, including my therapist, said, and I eventually agreed. I believed it. For years, I didn't think about those dolls unless someone brought them up. The old woman had been suffering some kind of delusion. No point in finding out what exactly. Probably wasn't even possible. Then, I got another call. What? What did you just say? The dispatcher didn't know about the kids and the dolls. That was half a decade ago at this point. Can you hear me? Yes. North side. Gentleman says 2 kids showed up on his doorstep. No missing children reported tonight. A boy and a girl? The kids? I asked. Yeah, how'd you know? I didn't explain. I'm on it, but send more constables, please. So many similarities to the previous tragedy. The time of year, the wrong side of midnight, the kids gaining entry to the home. Except that hadn't happened last time. They were dolls, I reminded myself. I would have to go to the house in the posh side of town and find actual kids there. Then I'd do my job and get them home. Fear against resolve, I gripped the steering wheel too tight and my fingers went numb. Big, dead hot dog fingers trembled when I got out of the cruiser in the huge driveway. No lights were on in the mansion at the top of the hill. I'd hoped the other constables would have arrived, but I was alone again. It took me a few minutes to calm down and not call dispatch for an ETA. As I approached, I could see the front door had been left slightly open. My flashlight revealed a big foyer, enough to fit a house. Since there hadn't been a crime reported, I felt confident to call out to the owner. Hello? An echo replied. The place really was that big. Bridal Veil Lake PD, your front door's open, sir. I rang the doorbell and waited a bit, but nobody showed. I don't know why I didn't call dispatch or wait for another constable. The only reason I went in, I think, was because I had to know if history would repeat itself. I'm coming in. The switches were dead. no power. The grand staircase wrapped the foyer in a broad embrace, and in the center, they were there, propped up beside a headless storyteller. At first I didn't understand, and I tried talking. "It's gonna be okay," I said to the headless man. He'd been posed with an oversized Grimm's fairy tale book between his thighs and arms. Before each of the black-eyed dolls, set up to appear as attentive children, a tall glass of milk and a bowl of chips had been placed and left untouched. I choked out a gasp. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. How could the dolls be here? Attempts to draw my firearm and use my radio went about as well as you can imagine. The gun hit the marble floor, and I communicated nothing of use to dispatch. Maybe that was good. I might have shot the other constables when they showed up. They found me on my knees and hysterical. I kept pointing at the dolls. They thought I meant the headless victim. "It's gonna be okay," one of them said, and it felt like I'd said it, or this constable had been cloned from my cells. Funny the places a shattered mind wonders. "Okay?" I asked. "I don't remember much about that. I went to the hospital. They had to sedate me. I wouldn't stop talking about the dolls. Olive and Matthew," my therapist said. He'd come to visit and explained what had happened. "It's a terrible coincidence," he said. "Those dolls are the same, yes, from the last incident. Apparently they didn't belong to the woman who passed." I don't know why this information horrified me. Well, who the hell do they belong to?" I shouted. "It's all right," he said. It's not entirely what you think." He really pissed me off. "Look, just explain it then." The dolls weren't known to the relatives. They claimed the old lady who had been decapitated didn't like dolls of any kind. She found them creepy. Your colleagues put them into evidence for lack of a better option. Then they were sold at auction. And the rich guy bought them. No, but somebody did. And that person, well, they're the killer, I'm afraid. A man was discovered in the mansion basement, covered in blood, with the head of the owner. I thought you said it'd be all right. The man was mentally ill, but he bought those dolls. Maybe he even called about the kids. Do you see what I'm saying? Some kind of copycat killer? He shrugged, his bony shoulders in the tweed coat. It's the only thing that makes sense. Perhaps he knew the other schizophrenic man that killed the woman who thanked me. The important thing to note is that nothing supernatural is occurring. The therapist smiled. What? It's an unfortunate coincidence. I mean, that bullshit smile twitched. I've been around long enough to know when someone's pulling a con. I never thought it was supernatural. Why did you say that? I asked. He chuckled nervously. An unfortunate choice of words. I didn't mean to imply that. How do you know the names? The names? Of the dolls, I said, before attempting to get out of the hospital bed. Handcuffs held my wrists. The sedatives had prevented this observation until the urge to punch the therapist moved my body. What the hell is going on? Why are you telling me this? You're not from the department. What is happening? He backed away towards the door. Calm down. The killer named them. He kept saying the names over and over. The inspector contacted me. She thought it best I talk to you. I agreed, and bullshit. He suddenly went mute, his lips mouthing the words, "Help me," over and over. His eyes darted to the little window in the door. At the same time, a shadow passed across his face. The therapist shivered and sniffled back a tear. "You should run," he said, his last words. All at once, the man collapsed. "What the... Help! Help!" I shouted. The nurse came in and did their thing, but he was gone. I asked him if he was gone. They stopped trying to revive him, one of them confirming his death. How had he died? A real tragedy, another unfortunate coincidence. The deceased therapist had an unknown aneurysm that just happened to trigger while he begged for help and a shadow crossed the window. It was all bullshit. I took his advice. After my wife picked me up from the hospital, I told her I'd taken early retirement. She looked relieved until I told her we needed to leave Bridal Veil Lake. I purchased a cottage up north on the Oxbow Lake. My family didn't come. Who could blame them? I didn't think they were in danger until I learned everybody is, and there are no safe places. They came on the third night. At first, the knocking struck too softly. I thought I'd imagined it. Then it became more persistent, more rapid. I didn't move from the recliner or even lower the footrest. I just watched the door and did my best not to breathe too loudly. The knocking continued with desperate urgency. Then tiny fingernails scratched at the door. Soft weeping followed that. A child for sure. I could no longer be idle. I went to the window and peeked through the curtain. The expected pair, Olive and Matthew, wept in the gloom on the stoop. They weren't dolls this time. They were kids, flesh and blood, and human. I relented and opened the door. The very image of the dolls looked up to me. Misery and fatigue had captured the innocence from their face. I know what an overtired child looks like. This wasn't that. The little boy and girl hadn't rested in days. They swayed on their feet, avoiding collapse by way of fear or something greater. I just didn't know that yet. I'm not crazy. I don't believe in ghosts or whatever this was supposed to be. I hadn't been drinking anything but pop, and there was no gas leak in the cottage or monoxide detectors would be going off. The kids were real, and they were scared. But so was I. I grabbed their arms and basically tossed them behind me and into the living room. It was dark on Oxbow Lake with a million places to hide. I shut the door and threw the bolt. Olive and Matthew clutched one another by the recliner. "What's going on? Who are you? How did you get here?" They stared, but not at me or anything. Both were underweight and filthy, a combination of urine and stale sweat emanating from their simple clothes. "Go to the couch and lie down," I said, completely aware of the pattern I was fulfilling. I went to the kitchen and grabbed some apples and cheese. I set it down on the coffee table. "Eat," I said. Neither would look at the food. "Eat," I said louder. They had to eat. It felt crucial. If they ate, then they were real, because the food would be gone, and it seemed like tangible proof of our existence. Olive yawned. Matthew's expression contorted with scorn, while his bottom lip trembled. He seemed angry with her. She looked ashamed. Both started to cry again. "What the hell happened to you?" I dialed 911 and went through the process of summoning the police. The dispatcher thought I was crazy when I demanded a severe response. "You'll be lucky to see a constable within an hour, sir," she said. "You're so far away." I couldn't argue with that, but I tried anyway. "I'll be dead before that. Something isn't right." I told her about the dolls and my time with the BVLP. She listened intently because that's what she was trained to do. Talking was good. Talking meant life and focus off of whatever she might believe I could be capable of. The call hadn't gone well. In other words, I'd simply cast myself as crazy, a possibly dangerous suspect. I hung up. Maybe they'd get here fast because of the kids. Maybe I'd be beheaded long before a hope of rescue. The kids leaned into the cushions, closed their eyes, and immediately fell asleep. No bites had been taken of the food. I got my gun from the bedroom. When I returned, the dolls were beside them. All 4 kids could be mistaken for sleeping children. A tall, disheveled man stood by the peeled screen of the open door. Only his fingernails, bitten and jagged, caught the edge of the lamplight. Shadowed lips muttered gibberish at first, but then his words became clear. "Dolls don't eat. Dolls don't eat. Dolls don't eat." I aimed. He lunged, and I fired. He staggered, but not before wrapping his large hand around the barrel of the gun. I put another bullet through him, yet he didn't fall. With surprising strength, he smacked me across the face, and I dropped the gun. He retrieved it, and somehow our positions in the living room were reversed. He stood near the couch. The real kids had run away. Only their simulacrums remained. I stood near the expertly sliced screen of the front door. The man's narrow head resembled a crescent moon. He appeared confused by the blood exiting his body as he struggled to level the gun. I wasn't about to wait around for him to figure it out. I leapt through the open window as a bullet shattered the glass above my head. My ass hit the dirt, and I tore off up the pitch of the forest, figuring I'd hide somewhere until the police arrived. For a while that worked. I lay in the midst of some thorny brush, scratching myself up good, until time enough said the man had to be dead from blood loss. I endured the escape from the brambles, crawling until something firm pressed between my shoulder blades. "There you are," said a voice, impossibly calm and smooth. "Don't move. I have you. The blade is sharp, and I've done this before." I did as he said, and remained as still as my fear would allow. "Of course, you understand something about it now." When I remained silent, he ordered me to answer, punctuating the request with the tip of his knife. "You make them knock on the door in the night. They're supposed to be like dolls, and if they're not, then the kind caretakers have to die. Olive and Matthew must become the same as their dolls. Exactly the same." "Why?" The knife point penetrated slightly. "That's not for you to know. We're only here because of bad luck. You happened upon 2 instances of the training. They were so little that first time. They're older now, but they don't look it. We don't let them grow much." "You cut off that woman's head in the hospital," I accused. The knife pressure relaxed a little. "Perhaps I was wrong, and you don't get it." But then I did, and resumed tension forced me to reveal everything. "You didn't kill that woman. You didn't kill the rich guy. And you aren't going to kill me." The moon-faced guy had been a ringer for the murderer, just like the other 2. Where did he find so many mentally ill people to take the fall? He'd need access. He'd have to be a doctor of some kind. Or a therapist. "You're alive, so you didn't die in the hospital. No aneurysm. How's that possible? The nurses..." The therapist laughed. "Elementary, my dear Watson. I made up a story for the nurses. I told them you were dangerous and obsessed with me. I needed to cut contact with you, and, while certainly dramatic, they were all too willing to help out a colleague." "You wanted me to go far away." "I hoped you would, but never thought you'd be so dense as to choose yet another perfectly isolated location for me to work. You would have been much safer in your home." I was too scared to feel stupid. "Now, we're going back to see Olive and Matthew. My poor slave is likely dead, so it's my turn to cut, and that's fine. I'm out of practice, and there's no need to rush." "Why let the victims contact the police?" "The children have to see that no one can help them. They're mine. Makes it more fun, too." "But why the dolls? You're leaving a trail." He snickered. "Less than breadcrumbs. Only you've connected 2 of the scenes, and I've left dozens over the years. Granted, the last one was dramatic. I couldn't help myself. I wanted Olive and Matthew to see what happened to good people when they disappoint me." I thought of Olive's yawn, and how hungry they must always be. One of them ate. The knife pierced my skin, and I gasped and writhed. "Dolls don't eat. Now get up, into the house," and the distant thrum of an engine filled the otherwise perfect quiet of the night. Noise travels easily across the water, so we waited and listened. When it became clear that a vehicle was approaching, he drew in a sharp breath and exhaled slowly, calming himself. "Well, someone's coming. It happens." "You gonna kill me?" The pressure of the knife tip evaporated like the presence of the psychotic therapist. I leapt to my feet and threw a wild punch into the dark. Nothing but air swept over my knuckles. "Coward. I won't keep quiet. I'm not afraid." I lied badly. "I'll find you. I'll find those kids. You hear me? I'm coming. Olive, Matthew." He chuckled, already some indeterminable distance away. "Good luck. Tell anyone you think will care, or will believe you." Headlights bounced down the narrow dirt road. The front door of the cottage opened and filled with the therapist. I screamed and rushed him and realized my next mistake too late. The man wasn't the therapist, but an off-duty park warden, keenly aware of his surroundings and the clumsy charge of an old wounded cop. He flipped me with some kind of judo. I landed across the coffee table on the untouched food, facing the black-eyed dolls. A pair of cuffs came next. I ranted about the dolls and the therapist and the children, but to no avail. They found the moon-faced martyr crouched by the broken window. Even dead, he still appeared confused. The warden used his cell to call for more support. The dispatcher had only called him because she knew he lived near Oxbow Lake. I told the story so many times and begged them to look for the therapist and those kids. Hours later, someone must have called him because they came back with another unfavorable fabrication. The therapist had never left Bridal Veil Lake and answered the call from Huntsville police on a landline at his office. He must have drove back," I said. "But Huntsville and Oxbow Lake are roughly 5 hours away from Bridal Veil Lake." I'd been questioned for 6 hours. "He also told us about your condition." I laughed. Sure, of course he did. But what about the break-ins and the dolls?" The constables looked at one another. "We asked about that. He says it's possible, perhaps even likely, given your trauma, that you took those dolls from evidence. That's where they were after your last discovery. You had access and a reason to dwell on them." "A reason?" They were choosing their words carefully. "What about the intruder?" "He's a local, an addict, really ill. He's been arrested for breaking into cottages before. He usually does it to empty ones. You just moved to Oxbow. Even with lights on and the vehicle out front, he probably didn't understand it was occupied. You surprised him." "I surprised him?" I said incredulously. After more protests, I was released and told to be grateful. An investigation would follow, of course, but no charges laid unless something more incriminating was found. "It won't be," I said bitterly. The constable walked me out of the Huntsville station, shaking his head and walking away. Man doesn't know how lucky he is. Before I could object, the door shut. I packed my stuff and raced home. I didn't have my gun, of course, but I figured he wouldn't be armed at his office. If he was, it'd be with a knife. In a fair fight, I'd take it and cut his damn head off. Ignoring the protests of his secretary and the man seated in the treatment room, I found him. He appeared alarmed, scared. What's the matter?" "What? Didn't expect to see me again?" I moved closer to his desk and he stood up, backing away to the large window. We were on the 5th floor of the building. "Where are they?" "Who?" I braced my foot against the desk and pushed it slowly until his legs were trapped against the sill. Olive and Matthew. I don't, he yelped when I pushed harder. I swear, the police in Huntsville, they called. I understand something happened up there, but I can assure you, you died in the hospital right in front of me. He looked to the other man in the room, his patient. I didn't even visit you in the hospital. I'm clearly not dead. Your PTSD must have caused a psychotic break and... Liar! We argued more, but the BVLP showed up and I was strongly encouraged to leave, which I did. I refrained from telling him this isn't over, because then I'd be arrested. He already knew. He was counting on it. I went home next and tried to talk to my wife and family. He'd called them first and told them to be careful, told them to call the police if I started behaving erratically. My story, of course, fell into that category. You can't stay here, my wife said, and it hurt to know that she wouldn't believe me, and never could. I left without argument. He found me later in the park that night. The nervous demeanor had been left behind for his patients and the rest of the world. He lit a cigarette and asked if I wanted one. You son of a bitch, I said. He exhaled a plume into the air. So now you understand. How I'm about to kill you? Sure. I had nothing to lose. They're dead if I am, he said, completely calm. Seems like I'd be doing them a favor. He pulled a small pistol out of his coat. No one would be surprised if I carried this and shot a crazed attacker. What do you want? I had nothing left to give him anymore. No one gets away. They have to know. So, you gonna kill me? Eventually, yes. I will come and we'll finish what we started. They'll knock in the night and you'll answer the door, let them in, and offer them food. Which they won't eat, he nodded, because they're dolls. If they're not by then it'll be over. I'll find others, but I think they'll do fine. Tell me why you're doing this. I'm as good as dead anyway. He held his cigarette in clenched teeth, and then he smiled. You'd be shocked how much one will pay for a doll of mine. Quite shocked indeed. That's not why you do this, I said. Not enough of me remained to shed a tear. I felt hollow, dead already. I couldn't be shocked anymore. When they knocked, I would open the door. I'd try to help them, though it seemed futile, and failure was almost assured. He backed away until confident that I wouldn't follow. I stayed in the park the rest of the night, but moved into the motel where I currently live the next day. Now I wait. I'm typing this out and putting it out there, so maybe when I'm gone, when I'm headless, someone will look for those poor kids and give them something to eat. That's my last low hope, at least.